So Kees, thank you so much for taking the time today. Give us a little narrative as to your journey as yet. When you wake up in the morning, you open any professional network, or you open LinkedIn, or even entertainment television, you will get the term AI. From your
I love the question. I love this perspective as well. So, okay, within Microsoft, we are predominantly engaged with enterprise customers.
Welcome to Tech Bytes with Ash, where we discuss trends in digital technology that support true business outcomes. I'm Ashu Bhatia, a consultant, an author, and a practitioner of all practical insights on your technology investments.
So Kees, thank you so much for taking the time today. Give us a little narrative as to your journey as yet, right? Where did you grow up? How did that shape your aspirations? How are you doing so much cool tech work?
Love the question. Thanks for having me. My journey is probably unconventional. I grew up on a fish farm.
Wow.
And this was back in the Netherlands, so I have a thick Dutch accent.
There you go.
Hope to mask it a little, but
good.
anyways.
Yeah.
So basically in my formative years, I worked in the factory from very early age. That was a big part of my childhood.
Very nice.
And because my parents were the entrepreneurs behind it, I grew up with an entrepreneurial mindset as well. So I started my own company when I was 16 in web design. It was early 2000s, not even yet actually. So before the bubble burst, and had great success in it. Moved to Sweden. So from the Netherlands to Sweden, around when I was about 17 years old and a half. Redid basically my high school there in Swedish. And after 2 years finishing a year ahead of schedule, I wanted to get out of that situation and move to Paris. So basically took the opportunity to go to France. And there I burned through all my savings whilst in university. I decided it was a good idea to move back to the Netherlands. So I moved back to the Netherlands, started my second company in order to get myself out of the financial predicament that I got myself into. And it was really more into the deep tech, so rather than just web design, I moved into systems integration, how do we do backend solutions, work with a lot of fancy names, and that was a lot of fun. And I do think it helped with my education. So I basically studied information science, which is the combination of IT and management. And with the company, I could put that into practice, which was great. I ended up teaching some of the courses that I was supposed to be taught. So that was an interesting journey, I would say. But then after that, I decided to join IBM, and I did that with predominantly one customer, KPN. So telco, that's sort of where I grew up from a professional point of view. And then I wanted out of telco, so I moved into FSI and joined Royal Bank of Scotland. And that sort of pivoted into the opportunity to come to Thailand, which is where we are today.
Excellent.
Yes.
So that's a great journey, right? You started from factories, digital plants, a lot of entrepreneurship, and then you went to school to get the formal education as well. And then you went to telecom. And then these days now as CTO at Microsoft here, that's phenomenal. Now, great journey. We wanted to jump right in this day and age, everyone, you wake up in the morning, you open any professional network, or you open LinkedIn, or even entertainment television, you will get the term AI. From your vantage point, developing, inventing technology, AI hits you everywhere.
Yep.
It hits you when you're driving on the road. It hits you when you wake up in the morning. I would love your vantage point to understand, do you think AI is always just a productivity tool, like the way it's kind of projected, or is there something in AI right now or in the future as a potential for human growth?
I love the question. I love this perspective as well. So, okay, within Microsoft, we are predominantly engaged with enterprise customers. And yes, our stack looks very much towards how do we ultimately drive productivity, because that's ultimately the bread and butter of Microsoft. Now, from a personal lens, right, just taking off the corporate hat, so to speak, I do think within the way that AI is embedding itself in basically our everyday life, it is going to be a lot deeper than today. And when we're looking at how that stack is evolving in terms of not just the capabilities, but also in terms of the wearables that we're being provided now. Look at what Meta's glasses, for example, are offering. It's very interesting point of view in terms of how you leverage AI within an everyday context.
Right.
But it's clear that we're craving for something that makes it deeper and more meaningful to us. At the same time, though, I'll give you a story. So I bought my kid, who's 5 years old, and she's a lovely individual with a lot of enthusiasm, this smartwatch, which is designed for kids, and it has a couple of AI components in it, which makes it really interesting, and she loves it for video calling, taking pictures. And then the school said, I'm sorry, we don't allow that. And I was like, why not? Because I travel a lot. I want to be in touch with my kid.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, but she uses it during school. I'm like, no, she doesn't, because I can literally monitor and manage through the AI when she's off class, when she's in breaks and so on.
Yes.
And they're like, yeah, but actually the real reason is it makes other kids jealous. And I think this is where it's a part where there's an application to AI, but there's also a divide that is going to happen. Yeah. Right? The people that have financial means to ultimately avoid the better solutions will create, I do believe this seriously, an advantage over a disproportionate amount of the population that hasn't. And that is a very difficult, but also a very dangerous kind of divide. It will worsen where we are today in terms of the tech divide already. And I do think that may have even bigger implications than just how we ultimately leverage and consume AI.
I think that's a great point that you bring AI in education, right? Yeah. It's funny that you say that. The other day I was watching on the weekend some interview by Salman Khan, who's part of Khan Academy, and talking about, when ChatGPT, for lack of better words, when OpenAI just kind of experimented, said, here it is, right? When that happened, a lot of colleges started saying, or schools started saying, we will not allow that. Yep. But I think his perspective was that it's a great tool. It's like anything else in life. Technology can be used for good or for bad. But he said, to your point, if you go to the rural parts of the world sometimes, can this technology be used to kind of elevate those kids who maybe don't have access to that education or that teacher? And yet you could kind of bubble up the demographic part of education, right? So I would think that there's some good that you could do.
Yes, so I love that, right? So I definitely have a perspective on it. And it may be a bit controversial as well. So I fundamentally believe that AI should be, in its current form, but also in its future forms, part of how we ultimately work with our kids. Yes, we do try to limit screen time, but AI doesn't necessarily come in a screen time factor. It can be voice, it can be interactive, it works and thinks with you, it can help you educate. We have always been confined to a standardized classroom format, whereby you either fit or you don't. And let's face it, ultimately, most people don't necessarily fit within a standard format. So everybody learns differently. Everybody has its own preferences and ultimately different ways of thinking, and thereby building the skill sets that they need for the future. Again, I look at my kid and she struggles with likely dyslexia, similar like her dad. And also the way she interacts in a classroom, it's learning through play, it's learning through building experiences, learning through interaction. Reading and sitting still for her is difficult. Yeah. So trying to force a kid to do right that at every single moment from basically 8 in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon is a tough ask. And I remember when I was in school, that wasn't fun. Yeah. I didn't actually learn. I only started to learn when I was in university. Exactly. Yes, I got my basics done, but it didn't feel like I was progressing. Exactly. And I do think AI can seriously unlock that potential within kids. The other thing, to your point, like how do we enable the more rural areas, the population that doesn't have necessarily the financial means to avoid these type of devices. And this is where I think companies like Microsoft are making a fundamental difference. We're investing quite significantly in helping education and helping ultimately the population flourish with AI, because we all feel a sense of responsibility, and I can call it AI for good if you want. Yeah. And I do think other companies like Amazon, like Google, like even Oracle now are all in these ways, and they're all trying to do similar things ultimately to help bridge the divide, because one way or the other, we will need to have the capability to work integral with AI. Yep. And secondly, as we do so, we will need to develop better capabilities as how we as humans are going to interact. like this,
Yeah.
but also how we interact with the machine.
Yeah.
And that means a pivot in terms of how we're thinking, how we're ultimately doing things. There's been a couple of fundamental studies that recently came out by MIT, for example, whereby the use of AI shows within your brain that ultimately it shuts down certain areas and functions, and they are no longer flourishing or basically lighting up within the MRIs, which is interesting, right? But at the same time, I do think that when these models are helping us to think more critically, to help us ask questions, to think more creatively, I think we can actually evolve as humans rather than being held back by the AI. And Anthropic is making some very interesting developments in that area.
Yep.
And I do think like us bringing, for example, Anthropic into Copilot now and giving that flexibility is a great thing.
That's awesome.
But that's really the way I'm looking at it. Like ultimately, A, we need to work with AI. B, we need to equip ourselves better to have the capabilities all around. And C, I do think we need to have much better capabilities in terms of creativity and thinking deeply and critically about everything that is around us in order to be still relevant.
No, that's great. That's great. So I think it all boils down to the whole thing is the human intent, right? Absolutely. If you want to help a child to learn, customize to his or her, learning patterns, that's great, because I've already read that some schools are already imbibing and some companies are imbibing that technology to say that if someone is interacting with a digital device, however, and learning something, can you manage, just like we do sentiment analysis for a lot of our enterprise and corporate clients, can we see if the kid is getting frustrated or getting excited? Can we see visual cues? Can we see verbal cues? And kind of mingle that to pause or elongate or whatever the study material. If you go from the 5-year-old to more like teenage kids, right? It's considered like a dopamine hit for now, right? There's a lot of devices. To your point, the human interaction, eye to eye, face to face is always there, but then managing and interacting with machine. And then I know we're getting into the world where machine to machine is beginning to happen. So all those interactions will be important. Those apps that are giving you those clicks, those likes, and shareholder value is being created. But is there something beyond that you see as part of your work that AI could be more like a guidance, just like a nutritionist for a healthy human being?
Yeah, interesting. So I'm looking at the role of agentic AI, and I'm thinking about how this is ultimately going to massively change our current world. The world where we have always been, I would say, focused on clicks, likes, and all that, is going to disappear through AI. I fundamentally believe that. AI is going to do things for us on our command, based on our preferences, in a very different type of interface, whereby we basically can really become free from those dopamine hits. And I do think with the right implementations of AI, that is really, really possible. And we look at, for example, MasterCard, who is working on agentic payments, whereby basically you ask your ChatGPT to go shopping on your behalf for a pair of shoes that you love. And it will come back with that pair of shoes at the lowest possible price. And basically there's not a single click involved. So it will disrupt a lot of business models as well. Second to that, I do think there's this interesting component of how AI becomes more embedded in our day-to-day lives and thereby really more helpful to all of us. Amazon Alexa is on that course as well, and you can see like how that's progressing. Samsung AI is trying to beat that and match that with all of the household products. It's really interesting how all of these different companies are doing different things. But where I think ultimately the value is going to come from for us as consumers is when these start to integrate and these AIs actually start acting on behalf of each other, on behalf of the best interest of me with each other. And I think that's the role towards we're moving. And open standards are going to be really, really critical to that. But also ultimately having clarity onto what is ethical, what's responsible, where do we draw the line of that automation? That's going to be a critical component. The way I see basically us evolving currently, legislation is way behind. Lawmakers have very little idea about what AI really is, how it works, how it's ultimately going to impact human life. And therefore, there are not necessarily these controls yet in place. And I don't think that they will be in place anytime soon in a way whereby it will be effective enough. So it is ultimately, in my opinion, the companies that are building these capabilities, responsibility to ensure that we're doing this in the best interest of the humans. Now, there's another problem with that. There are plenty of bad actors that take advantage, right? And we don't live in a pretty rosy kind of
it's
world.
not an ideal world.
Yeah.
People will exploit sometimes some things.
Absolutely. So, like, there was this hack of a nursery school where thousands of kids were exposed.
Yes.
And there was a lot of backlash, and ultimately hackers decided to remove the content. At least that's what they're saying. Now, I think with AI, these factors, these risks become even greater.
Yeah.
And that also means that the ability is there to act on negative intent. So, for example, if I were posting my kids' pictures a lot online, they could easily create any kind of movies.
Yeah.
So I don't. So us choosing to be more aware about what is possible today, how does that potentially impact the future of me, but also of my kids and my family and everybody that I know basically as friends.
Yeah.
And being very cautious, I think is going to be even more important. And there's a lot of trade-offs to be made. Like, yes, convenience is on the rise, as I said earlier, but on the second hand, there's a lot of implications that we will need to think much deeper about. And I don't think we are getting it right as of today yet. Responsible AI, the practices, the frameworks, it's great. It's a good starting point, but I don't think we are anywhere near where we need to be in order for it to be successful. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And to be honest with you, we all read, you mentioned something around open standards about responsible AI. So you're saying, and that's exactly right, that the companies and the enterprises who do their design by responsible AI are the ones who might win in the future because legislation is far behind. Frankly, when I look at the continents, right, and I moved from the US a couple of years ago, I've worked in Europe quite a bit, and then now here in Asia, the way I kind of summarize the continents, if I will, of the direction is that yes, US is trying to invent things. Now China is, it's also inventing a lot. Europe is talking a lot about regulation rather than inventing right now. And Asia, I see a little difference. It's like they're trying to leapfrog in many places because there's a little less regulation. It's the masses, it's the population and the young generation that adopt it. So it's a rife environment to experiment. So they're leapfrogging quite a bit. That's how I look at it. And Africa is the next big wave. Where do you see really legislation and regulation and open AI and all going? Because I get that question from a lot of C-suite that I work with saying, what is it that we need to go for? There's not one regulatory body. The legislation doesn't know the technology, and the guys who are in the technology are kind of speeding ahead with technology. In that environment, where do you see the pieces falling, really?
It's a really hard question. I don't have an answer to that. So I think if we break it down into logical components, there's probably 5 components to this. So the first one to think about is really the uses of AI. And by that I mean it can be used in so many different ways, right? For example, let's take a bank. As a bank, I can now determine whether or not somebody should be eligible for credit, has a likelihood of paying it back in data sources that were otherwise not available to me, and basically make an estimated guess with AI whether or not this person should be getting its credit. I can automate these decisions easily as well.
Yeah.
Is that the right thing to do? Or should there still be human control within that decision to make sure that ultimately there is a human ethical component to the decision? Or should it be as such where the AI is fully explainable, that at least the logic to how the decision was made is getting there? And maybe that's better than current models because current credit scoring is non-transparent. So that's one component, the use of AI. The second one that I think is really important is as the technology stack evolves and AI gets better and better, it is very hard to predict what that future interface looks like, what that future of AI actually is going to be.
Yeah.
In order for legislation to be effective, they need to have that picture. So I think this is maybe the biggest challenge that
the target itself keeps moving because technology is evolving.
Moving there.
Yeah.
And then the third factor that I think is really interesting with this as well is legislation and regulation has always been designed to de-risk and to protect. But in a world whereby AI becomes forefront, is that still the right attitude?
Yeah.
It's a big question. And I think it should be more geared towards ensuring that the companies that leverage AI are doing the right thing, rather than trying to restrict the technology, because restricting means hindering. And I don't think that that's the right approach. And I don't think that it is possible to basically do that. The fourth component is, as these companies that are inventing all this great stuff and all the startups that are springing up everywhere, how do we ultimately make sure that these guys are taking that responsibility to make it ethical, to make it in the best interest of humans, and that they are held accountable to that high bar, that high standard. And again, that is a really challenging but a really important component that I do think we should be focused on a lot more. Because at least that way we exercise some control. And then fifth, how do we ultimately, I would say, change or think differently about criminal intent of the users of AI, and ultimately make sure that we can hold people accountable for their actions. For example, if I leverage AI to hack into a government database, steal information for people like you and I, but I have AI do that on my behalf, am I the one that's responsible? Or is AI responsible?
Exactly.
That's the point. So there's a lot of complexity in all of this.
Yes, and not totally. And that's great. You put a good framework there. That the reason that it's complex is that there's so many moving parts to it. And the last one that you mentioned, where the criminal intent itself is a question, it's like that movie, right? Minority Report, right away, knowing is that going to happen or not?
I wasn't even thinking.
I was talking to another, he was a chief analytics officer elsewhere, and he's like, most of those ideas come from my sci-fi movies. I mean, it's mind-boggling for people who are in technology itself. Imagine the legislators who are trying to understand the impact of it. Like if you look at the human evolution, from fire to computers to now AI, right? Or electricity, right? They say that nothing works without electricity, but you don't see it, right? So that's how AI is going to be. There was some experiment where the AI robot was actually lying, but making a mistake deliberately to make the human think that it's, real and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to get, from where we are today, AI is going to get better. So where do you think all this is going?
I think there's a few elements to your question, right? So when we're starting to embed human characteristics in AI, which is actually what we're already doing, it makes it easier for us to connect, which I do think is a good thing. It is also a very dangerous thing. And I will give you a real example. When you chat with ChatGPT or with Copilot or whatever else, you get presented an LLM with a persona. And the way I look at it is it's basically an overly eager intern that has no clue what he's actually doing. So if your prompt isn't designed to get a truthful, factual response, you will get false information. Period. But it's the same with humans.
Exactly.
And I do think the more we treat AI like a colleague, which is by the way where we're heading with Agentic AI anyways, like a colleague is super important. And a colleague means we have trust and respect for one another.
Exactly.
But it also means we set boundaries. It also means we have to be very specific about what we're expecting and what we're asking. And the vaguer we are, the less basically we manage that interaction, the less controlled the outcome will be. So I think that's one element. But I do think that also given how many of us are reaching out to these LLMs to basically get advice on emotions or state of being or even for our health, that there is a serious consideration towards where AI can add value in our lives and how we should start to move away from maybe some of the generalists towards more specialist kind of models.
That's great.
I think that's going to be a really important component to it. And then maybe the other one that I was also thinking about as part of your question is where things are heading. So agents are by default becoming more specialist. They are going to be more collaborative. They are going to be intertwined within our processes as to how we on a day-to-day operate. That means consumers as well as enterprises. But I also think there is going to be a need for us as humans to basically elevate our position within this stack. which means that having the capability of actually managing AI agents, colleagues, is going to be a very, very important skill. And that means very differently thinking about how we handle AI and making it much more like we're handling humans. Because ultimately, that's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve human intelligence within a machine capability.
Yeah.
And I do think that that's where the world is heading towards too. And it's going to be incredibly infusing and frustrating at some point and interesting, and I am scared of it.
Absolutely. No, it's, and I know that we could just do one podcast on just this one last topic that you alluded to. But the three things that you mentioned, right? The connection, and then the generalist to the specialist, and then agents being managed, right? So the first one, where we connect, and you mentioned, right? Like, it's like an intern that makes mistakes, doesn't know. I was talking to someone, it's like, when you have an intern, sometimes you have to coach them again and again. Then you ask them the right questions, you get the answers, but sometimes they're wrong. Human beings do that. I was talking to someone, I said, for me, wrong information is not as dangerous as sometimes it always agrees with me, this LLM. It's sycophancy, as it's called in English, is a more bigger risk to me that when you're working in a team, and I tell my team members, I said, sometimes if you have the right data points, always challenge me, because I don't know everything. No one knows everything. So challenge me, bring a perspective that might be counterintuitive, and we could explore that as a team, because, 5 brains are better than one. So that is a bigger challenge. And I think I read recently something about almost all these models, right? So OpenAI, Copilot, Grok, whatever you use, they're coming with more thinking models now, because they're saying spending 15 seconds on a question is even more important sometimes, rather than yes and da-da-da. On the last one where you mentioned agents have to be managed, right? I was talking to person, he says, I want to get my HR engaged more, because, the motto of the old companies is do more with less, right? So less human resources, more agents. How do you put policies around? If agents are really going to work for you, are there, how do you manage from a human resource and interaction and HR perspective? And I'm like, wow, that's another thing that we'll have to develop, and it's going to get confusing, as you said, scary, before it gets better.
Absolutely. So to those points, right? I think it's worth addressing them. So when we're thinking about these LLMs and this almost infinite need to agree to please, it's part of how these models have been trained and how they're built, right? Again, it's a personality that they're catering for. But if you combine proper prompt engineering, so developing basically your question and your thought process in the right way, with proper context engineering, which basically finds itself and understands in which it needs to operate, you can get to the outcome that you're looking for. Basically an LLM that will challenge you, that will disagree with you, and that isn't afraid to speak out for itself, to basically defend its own point of view. And this is the great thing that I think we're starting to allow for, which is basically, you can leverage existing models, but you can put them into your own context windows and ultimately help them evolve. And I love that. I think this is really cool, and this is something where the capabilities are infinite. The second point that you mentioned around these human HR processes. So it actually invoked a thought of that I have had for a while now. When I said managing, I really meant managing. That includes performance, that includes efficiency, that includes understanding the cost of an agent versus a human being as well. And that needs to be exactly as you said, embedded in HR, but HR is always about a human, right? So the whole function of HR is going to fundamentally change, and it's going to be much closer to IT than it's ever been. But finance is also going to change.
Exactly.
And as a result, I do think that the whole organizational model as we know it is fundamentally going to change. And I think there was a great example that I saw on LinkedIn earlier, whereas it's the chief executive, which is one person, an actual human being, who has a chief marketing officer who is an agent, who has a chief financial officer who is an agent, who has, and I can go on.
Yeah, I saw that. There was
right, but that's very likely a scenario that we're over time going to be heading towards to. Maybe not the chief functions, but definitely the underpinning functions. And this is why we're seeing already such a displacement in jobs. And this is why I am telling my kid, creative thinking, critical thinking are these skills I'm focusing you on.
The reason that this thing is so chaotic is it's truly the technology is moving at lightning speed. No matter what you do, you can get supersonic at best, and that's still slow.
Yes.
So wherever you go, you need to know where the future would be, and you got to get ready. But just to wrap things up, where can the audience kind of follow you?
Sure, there's an LLM there somewhere that knows about me. No, so I do LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's very simple. And I do welcome creative questions. And don't connect for me or with me for the sake of connecting, please, because that's not something I appreciate. I want real connections.
Thank you so much for your time today, but look forward to kind of bringing you back on. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.